I really like understanding stuff. Knowing stuff is good and all, but if you don't know something, it's only ever a 5 minute Google search away and you can find the fact, the piece of data you need. But understanding stuff, that's really unique to you, which is great, but it's also hard work. You need to think about stuff and you need some tools that you can use to help you kind of analyze the problem. Breaking things into categories and dividing them up and saying this is one thing and this is another is a tool that people often use to help sort of analyze problems and understand the situation. Philosophers have loved the ideas of categories forever. Aristotle and Kant really went hot for categories. So it's a tool I like to use a fair bit. Now, the first thing is I don't use it with a huge amount of philosophical rigor, so I won't spend a huge amount of time defining the categories, and often they'll blend and overlap. And secondly, I'm not pretending there's anything really profound in the categories I use. They're just helpful tools to understand the problem in front of you. In particular, I came up with this idea of categories and thinking of watch brands as fitting in or trying to satisfy one of two categories when looking at the recent Watches and Wonders 2023, looking at what watch companies were doing and trying to understand what they were getting at. And I came up with two categories of watch company, or two categories of behaviors that watch companies fall into: isolationist companies and expansionist companies. And let's talk about that a little after the intro. Hi, I'm Pete McConville. Welcome to my channel where I overthink, overanalyze, and generally just geek out on watches far more than is appropriate. If that sounds like something you're into, you know what? Watch this video, and if you like it, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. So as I said on the introduction, looking at Watches and Wonders 2023, I found myself looking at brands and thinking their behavior fell into one of two groups. And it was an interesting way of thinking and understanding what was going on. My two groups were isolationists and expansionists. An isolationist brand is a brand who knows who they are, they know who their customers are, and that's all they're trying to make happy. All of their releases are well understood, well inside their swim lane, to their established base, not intending to bring anyone new in. An expansionist brand, on the other hand, is often painting outside the lines, often swimming outside their lane, and routinely, perhaps even risking upsetting their existing customers, all for the opportunity to appeal to someone new, to find some new buyer, some new market. And if you did look at what different brands were doing at Watches and Wonders, you could see brands playing either one of those categories. Now, as I said on the introduction, I'm not necessarily pure. There are companies that try and split the middle and be a little bit of both, but we won't talk about that too much today. One other thing I would say is pretty much every brand starts as an expansionist. It is shockingly rare for a brand to start with customers and an established customer base. There are some that do it, but it's, as I said, so rare it's not really worth dealing with. So most brands start in an expansionary phase. What is interesting is how quickly do they turn into isolationists, because almost every brand does become isolationist after a certain point. What separates them is how aggressively do they do that and how quickly do they do it. But now let's talk about a case study in isolationism and expansionism. So the case study I want to use today is Tudor. Now, Tudor left the US market and essentially, for those of us in the West, essentially ceased to exist in and around 1996. And for the best research I can do, looking at the Wayback Machine, it was largely unmourned. It didn't look like a lot of people were desperate to see Tudor come back. They had a bit of a hiatus from 96 to 2013. And in 2013, they officially relaunched in the US and to many other territories. Interestingly, though, their expansion started 2 years earlier. If you do look at Hodinkee articles starting from 2011, it's clear that Hodinkee was in bed with the Rolex group and was clearly priming the pump, getting the world ready, or getting the Western world ready for the re-emergence of Tudor. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we started seeing retrospectives of Tudor watches that had once been around, and then we also started to see week on the wrists and wearing experiences of Tudor watches available outside of the US and other territories, but not available in the US. That's not going to be an accident. That's purely because someone was working with Hodinkee to pave the road before the initial launch 2 years later. So what we saw in that initial explosion of PR was also an explosion of watches. Over the next 4 years, we saw the Advisor released in 2011, the Fast Rider in 2011, the Pelagos in 2012, Black Bay started coming out in 2012. We saw the Routine return to the US market in 2013, where we saw the Heritage Chronograph, the Ranger in 2014, the Style Collection in 2014, the North Flag in 2015. If you look at that in terms of a media blitz, in the first 2 years between 2011 and 2012, when Tudor wasn't even active in the US market, Hodinkee alone had 15 articles about Tudor. In the next 2 years, when they just were introduced, and this is theoretically a new brand that's just trying to find its way, Hodinkee had 27 articles talking about Tudor. This is a brand that, as I said, is on a media and PR blitz, is really working hard to get its message out there, and at the same time is just throwing, in this case, I count, 8 new models at the market in a 4-year period. And those models are all over the place. They represent lots of different options. Some are looking back, some are looking forward, some are unique to Tudor and not like anything else. Others are straight up Rolex homages. As I said, they are really experimenting here, trying to find an audience. That they found an audience, that PR blitz was successful is well illustrated by looking at the Morgan & Stanley World Cup of Watches results. In 2015 and 2016, we don't have any numbers, but in 2017, when these charts start coming out, Tudor is nowhere to be seen. They don't exist yet. Not until 2018 do they appear, but then you see a meteoric rise from 2018, 19, and eventually 2020, where Tudor's expansion has been enormous and they have just exploded back onto the market. But then if you go back and look at Tudor's behavior in and around 2020, it started a little bit before, but I think you can use 2020 as a really dividing line. They switch from this expansionist mode down to a much more isolationist, maintaining mode. What we see around about that time is the Fast Rider gone, the Heritage Chrono gone, the North Flag gone, the Advisor gone, the Style series appears to have been removed, and everything now has become about the Black Bay, probably culminating in last year's release of the Pelagos 39, which was really what happens when the Pelagos and the Black Bay have a baby. And the Pelagos 39 is clearly intended as a bridge between those two collections to bring the Pelagos, to drag the Pelagos back into the new status quo, the new isolationist definition of Tudor, which is Black Bay territory. I suppose that's not an entirely complete argument. There were 2 other watches that came out during that time. That is the Tudor Royale and the Tudor Ranger. Whilst they are not Black Bays, they are clearly part of the same lineage in being homages of prior Rolexes. And that, homage to prior Rolexes has clearly now been isolated as Tudor's happy place. They have found their audience, they have found their customer base, they're putting a ring around it and saying, you are ours, we are going to make you happy. And you see the success of how happy they're making people in the positive responses to their work in Watches and Wonders 2023, where really all they gave us was Black Bays. If you look at the media personalities like Britt or Andrew Morgan or James Stacey, these are all avowed Tudor bros. These are all people who really like what Tudor does, really like the Black Bay. I think two of those three are Black Bay owners. One is a Pelagos 33 owner and a 39 owner. And these are all sort of acolytes of that brand. They raved about Tudor. They thought that Tudor absolutely killed the Watches and Wonders 23. I think at least two of those people declared the Black Bay 54 as the watch of the show, etc., etc. Whereas if you look at people that are not in the tent, you looked at the responses of people that are not Black Bay owners, and it's almost as though Tudor didn't turn up. Tudor simply had nothing for them. That interesting dynamic of what it's like to make your people happy, what happens when you switch from expansionist to isolationist mode, is also shown in what's happened with Tudor on those Morgan and Stanley League Cup tables of the top 20 brands. I spoke earlier about the explosion of sort of sales and how Tudor had rocketed up the charts through 18, 19, 20. As they've switched across into isolationism, that progress has stopped. And Tudor is now locked in at number 15 and doesn't appear to be going anywhere, at least over the last 3 years. Which I suppose begs the question, if Tudor did have such a good idea of what was making their base happy and was expanding, why didn't they keep trying to expand? Why haven't they tried to bring back the North Flag? Why haven't they tried to bring back their Heritage Chrono? Why have they decided to just switch so hard into isolationism? And I think you get an answer by looking at what's happened with Tag over that same period. Tag is a brand which over this period has been 100% committed to expansion and have shown that expansion is risky. Tag has generally fallen backwards in sales despite trying a million different things, despite trying everything from a $2,500 connected watch through to a $25,000 Tourbillon Mario Kart watch, then a $250,000 carbon cased, diamond encrusted, plasma watch. They've thrown everything at the market to find new buyers, new places to sell their watches, and they've paid for it. That has not. They're still making money. They're still solvent. But that risk hasn't quite paid off for them yet. According to rumor mills that I've got talking to other people in the industry, this kind of reaching for expansion has almost been fatal for 3 other brands. From what I understand, the desire to expand by looking at hybrid watches, smartwatches, silicon escapements with those monoblocks, almost killed Frederic Constant and Alpina. And it was the investment poured into that expansion that didn't pay off that left them vulnerable and needing to get bought out by Citizen to keep them running. I've also heard on the grapevine that it was Breitling's attempt to expand and move into new markets through the development of the absolute bleeding edge ChronoWorks movements during 2015 and 2016 that ultimately meant that the Schneider family had to relinquish control of that brand and have it purchased by CVC Capital Partners. So you can see why a brand like Tudor, after having had so much success and expansion, might at some point say, you know what, let's just call it quits here and say we're happy sitting at number 15. So let's finish on a high, though, and talk about why a brand might want to really commit to expansion and why might not, sort of stop halfway up the mountain like Tudor has. And let's go back to that brand Breitling that was on its knees and in need of a rescue in 2017. In that rescue, it was sold by the Schneider family to CVC Capital Partners for its rumoured 800 million Swiss francs. And at that time, it came in at number 19th on the Morgan Stanley Swiss watch rankings. During that time, or post that time, so in the next, what's that work out to be, 6 years, George Kern and the new management group have undergone a total rebranding. Virtually the entire catalogue has been turned over. Virtually, I would say at least 50% of the previous customers of that brand have been turned away. Not like someone stood at the door and said, don't come in, but the watches they loved, the ideas they loved, the marketing they loved, the ambassadors they loved have been spurned and turned away. And if you go to a bunch of Breitling, like forums and websites, you can see those people really angry, really bitter about what's been done to their company. And you see them crying out, when will Breitling ever return to its glory years and stage a revival? But the problem is, if you look at the responses to those pleas, what they'll say is, hang on, in 6 years, Breitling has gone from being on its knees to being one of the fastest rising companies in the Swiss market. It's gone from being valued at 800 million Swiss francs and now valued at 5 billion Swiss francs. It's gone from number 19 and falling on the watch rankings to number 9 and rated as one of the fastest growing brands with some of the best prospects out there. What revival are these people talking about? But the truth is, to them, their company has gone. Breitling committed to the expansion so hard that they were prepared to burn off existing customers and let them go, because to make them happy would have cost the company growth elsewhere. So I sort of said at the beginning that it's useful for us hobbyists to understand the concept of brands that are expanding versus brands that are being a bit more isolationist, and that can help us in our collecting. I think it can do so in two ways. One, as collectors, many of us, most of us, attach ourselves to brands in some way, shape or form. Understanding whether a brand is going through a period of isolation or whether it's going through an expansionary phase really does sort of give you some more information about what's going to happen in the longer term. Even if you're not necessarily a fan of a brand, you're just looking at a brand you're not really into, but from the outside, understanding whether that brand is going through an isolation phase or whether it's going through an expansion phase can kind of help you understand and analyze what they're doing. You can see Tudor isn't being lazy. Tudor isn't dumb because they're going through their isolationist phase now. It's just their business cycle. It's where they are at the moment. And you can acknowledge the fact that they'll probably be here for a while. And like Rolex, at some point, they will muster up a need to change and the expansion will begin anew. Likewise, you might look at Tag, and instead of thinking this is a random, unstructured, they have no idea what they're doing, understand, no, this is a brand going through an expansion phase that is trialing things, it is experimenting things. Not because they're incompetent, but because that's the phase of business that they're in. That's what they're trying to achieve. And I find that understanding what brands are doing makes me a better, even if I'm not necessarily interested in buying their stuff, makes me a better collector because I'm less likely to just shoot from the gut and have uninformed opinions and have a better idea and a better understanding and be able to have better discussions about what's going on. And at the end of the day, having those discussions is 90% of what collecting actually is. So anyway, that's my take on how brands have this kind of life cycle. Everyone starts as an expansionist, everyone becomes an isolationist at some point, and then most brands go through more expansionary phases. Spoken a little bit about what that might look like and why that might be helpful for us as watch enthusiasts to understand and look out for. What about you? Do you think this is a useful way of thinking about brands' activities? Do you think I've completely missed the mark and that this is all just rubbish? Do you not care and not understand why people would care what a business is doing? In which case, what the hell are you doing watching my video? But I know those people do watch my videos and they're going to leave a comment saying something like, who cares? Which always confuses me. But, welcome aboard. Thanks for your input anyway. I've been Pete McConville. This has been my channel. If you have enjoyed this, like, subscribe, hit the notification button, all that sort of stuff. And we will see each other later. Bye.